You can feel it coming, can't you? That little edge in the October air. The grocery bill that keeps climbing while the bag keeps shrinking. The quiet worry in the back of your mind that this winter is going to cost more and give you less. I felt it too. For years. Here's what I finally learned. You can carry a family through a Canadian winter on food you stored yourself, for pennies, without a freezer, without a generator, without depending on a single system that can fail you. Our grandparents did it every year. Then we were taught to forget it. I'm going to show you exactly how they did it. And near the end, I'll share one trick from an old Canadian farm bulletin that kept eggs fresh for months on a shelf, no cold at all. I didn't believe it until I tried it. I remember standing in my aunt's cellar outside Peterborough when I was maybe 11, watching my breath in the dark, staring at rows of carrots buried in sand like they were sleeping. I thought it was junk. I thought it was old and backward and beneath me. I spent the next 40 years being wrong. And the best part is this. You don't need a farm. You don't need to build anything new. Whatever house or apartment you're sitting in right now already has what you need. I'll prove it to you before we're done. So let me take you back to the thing I laughed at as a kid. Because it turns out my aunt knew something I paid dearly to relearn. For most of my adult life, I did winter the modern way. I filled a big freezer. I trusted the store. I figured food security meant a full fridge and a working credit card. And every single fall, I paid whatever the price was. Because what choice did I have? Then one December, the power went out for 3 days during an ice storm. My freezer turned into a garbage can. Hundreds of dollars. Gone. Sitting in a warm box in my garage. My neighbor, a man in his 80s who grew up near Renfrew, didn't lose a thing. He walked me down to his basement and showed me a cold corner stacked with cabbages, carrots, beets, and potatoes that had been sitting happily since October. Not one of them needed electricity. Not one of them cost him more than the seeds. That's when I understood the thing nobody had bothered to tell me. Before the freezer, before the year-round grocery flights, Canadians had already solved winter. They solved it so well that whole communities were built around it. Let me show you a place that still exists, that most Canadians have never heard of. There's a little town in Newfoundland called Elliston. They call it the root cellar capital of the world, and they mean it. There are well over 100 root cellars dug into the hills there, and the oldest one they've documented dates back to 1839. Think about that. A stone and earth-cold room, built the same year in the same rugged spot, still keeping vegetables cold and crisp after nearly 200 years. No motor, no compressor, no monthly bill. Just an understanding of how the earth itself holds a steady temperature. Here's the science my neighbor explained to me. The same science those Newfoundland families lived by. Go down about 4 to 8 feet into the ground, and the temperature stops swinging with the weather. It settles into a steady range right around the mid-40s to low 50s in Fahrenheit for most of Canada year-round. Cold enough to keep vegetables from rotting, warm enough that they never freeze solid. It's the exact range a modern refrigerator tries so hard to create, and the ground gives it to you for free. Our great-grandparents weren't being quaint. They were being smarter than we are. Now, here's the part that started to make me angry once I understood it. This knowledge didn't just fade away by accident. Somebody benefited from us forgetting it. And once I saw who, I couldn't unsee it. But before I get to that, let me make sure you actually know how to do this. Because understanding the history does nothing for you if your carrots still rot in November. So let me hand you the method, the real one, the way my neighbor taught me and the way my aunt did it in that cellar I laughed at. Start with what stores well, because not everything does. The champions of the cold cellar are potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, cabbage, onions, and winter squash. These are the vegetables that were bred over centuries, specifically to sit through a long, dark winter. They want to be stored. It's in their nature. The single biggest mistake I made when I first tried this, and I'll bet you'd make it too, is washing everything first. Don't. Do not wash root vegetables before storing them. That thin layer of dry soil is a natural protective coat. Wash them and you strip their defenses and invite rot. Just brush off the loose dirt with your hand and leave the rest. For carrots and beets, here's the trick from that cellar of my childhood. Twist or cut the green tops off, leaving about an inch. Then layer them in a box or a bucket, packed in damp sand or even slightly moist sawdust, so the roots don't touch each other. The sand holds just enough moisture to keep them from going soft, and it keeps them in the dark. Done right, carrots stored this way stay firm and sweet into March. I've eaten my own carrots in April that tasted better than anything I could buy. Potatoes want it dark and a touch humid, but never in that damp sand. Keep them in a paper bag, a burlap sack, or a slatted wooden crate so the air can move. And keep them far away from your apples and onions, because those give off gases that make potatoes sprout early. My grandmother knew that 80 years ago. It took a university study to tell me the same thing. Cabbages are the strange one. The old-timers would pull the whole plant, root and all, and hang them upside down in the cellar, or wrap each head in newspaper and set them on a shelf. Wrapped that way, a good cabbage can hold for 3 to 4 months. Onions and squash want the opposite of the roots. They want it dry and a little warmer, up on a shelf, spread out with air around each one. Get those few rules right, and you've just rebuilt the food security your family had 100 years ago in the home you already own. When I really dug into it, I found the turning point. It wasn't one villain in a top hat. It was a slow, deliberate shift that made a handful of industries very rich, while it made you and me dependent and forgetful. Go back to the 1920s and 30s. The electric refrigerator arrived in Canadian homes, and it was sold hard. And here's the thing about a fridge and a freezer. They don't just store your food. They create a monthly relationship with the power company that never, ever ends. Every hour of every day for the rest of your life, that appliance is quietly running a meter. The root cellar our grandparents used charged them nothing after the day they dug it. The freezer charges you forever. I'm not telling you to throw out your fridge. I'm telling you to notice who profited when we all decided the cellar was old-fashioned. Then came the second wave, and this one really got me. After the Second World War, the grocery system reorganized around one idea. Everything, everywhere, all year. Strawberries in January. Fresh produce trucked and flown across a continent so that the very idea of eating with the seasons started to feel like poverty. Storing your own root vegetables went from being normal, respectable, and smart to being something you only did if you couldn't afford better. That shift in shame was worth billions, because a family that stores its own potatoes buys fewer potatoes. A family that keeps its own carrots in sand doesn't need the store in February. Self-reliance is a terrible business model for somebody, so somebody made sure it looked backward. And it worked. It worked on me. I stood in a cold cellar full of free food at 11 years old and thought it was junk. But here's what they couldn't fully stamp out, and this is where it gets good. The knowledge didn't die, it just went quiet. It survived in Newfoundland outports, where the store was too far and too dear to depend on. It survived on the prairies, where a family near Saskatoon might be 40 miles from anything in a blizzard. It survived in the hands of old country immigrants, the Ukrainians and the Poles and the Scots, who came to Canada already knowing how to outlast a winter because they'd done it in colder, poorer places than this. Even our own government knew the truth and wrote it down. The Central Experimental Farm was established in Ottawa in 1886, and for decades the Dominion of Canada's Department of Agriculture printed practical bulletins for ordinary families, teaching them exactly how to store, cure, and preserve their own harvest without any machine at all. That knowledge was official. It was funded. It was mailed to farmhouses across the country. And then it was quietly allowed to gather dust while we were taught to plug something in instead. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right about now because I thought it too. You're thinking this is fine for somebody with a farm and a barn and an acre of land, but it does nothing for you in a bungalow in the suburbs or a rented apartment in the city. I want to stop and talk straight to you for a minute because this next part is the part I most wish somebody had told me, and it's aimed right at the home you're sitting in tonight. You do not need to dig anything. You do not need land. You do not need a contractor, a permit, or a single dollar of renovation. Almost every Canadian home already has a working cold storage spot hiding in plain sight, and I'll bet you walk past yours every day. Start with your basement, if you have one. The coldest corner, usually on the north or east side of the house, against an outside wall, down low near the floor, is very often sitting in that magic range all winter long. Older Canadian homes were frequently built with a cold room already, that little unheated closet under the front steps or in a corner, with a vent to the outside. Builders put those in on purpose. If you have one and you've been using it to store paint cans and Christmas decorations, you've been sitting on a free refrigerator this whole time. And it worked. It worked on me. I stood in a cold cellar full of free food at 11 years old and thought it was junk. But before I show you exactly who profits from that forgetting and how deep it goes, I want to take a moment to mention something. If everything we've covered so far feels like the beginning of a longer conversation you've been waiting to have, I've put the full depth of this research into a book. Canadian Edge, Canadian Complete, and Deep Canadian are the titles, and they go well beyond what I can fit into a single video. Every method, every source, every practical step for the home you're actually living in, written out the way a knowledgeable neighbor would explain it to you at a kitchen table. You can find the details in the description below. If this is the kind of knowledge you want to keep and return to, those books were written for exactly you. Now, with that in mind, let me tell you who spent the last century making sure you never learned any of this. No basement? No problem. This is the part that shocked me. An unheated attached garage, a covered porch, an enclosed balcony, even the space between your back door and a storm door can all hold winter vegetables through the cold months, as long as they don't freeze solid. In an apartment, the trick the old folks used was simple. A cardboard box or a wooden crate on the floor of a north-facing closet against an outside wall, packed with those damp sand carrots, stays cool enough to work in a Canadian winter. People in city flats did this for generations without saying a word about it. Here's how you find your spot tonight, and it costs you nothing. Buy a cheap thermometer or use one you already have. Set it in the corner you're curious about. Check it morning and night for a few days. If it's holding somewhere between just above freezing and about 50 Fahrenheit, you've found it. That's your cellar. That's the same steady cold those Newfoundland families dug down 8 feet to reach, and you already had it. The one thing you must manage in a modern airtight home is moisture and air. Root vegetables want a little humidity and a little fresh air, not a sealed plastic tomb. So use breathable containers, wood, cardboard, burlap, or a plastic bin with holes punched in it. Set a shallow pan of water nearby if the air is bone dry from your furnace. Check on things every couple of weeks and pull out anything starting to turn, because one bad potato really can spoil the whole bin. That's not a saying, that's chemistry. Do that, and you, in your existing home, with no renovation and no expert, have exactly what my 80-year-old neighbor had when the ice storm knocked out my whole freezer. You've taken one piece of your winter back. But storing raw vegetables is only half of what our grandparents knew. Therefore, let me take you further into the part that feels almost like a magic trick, because vegetables in a cold corner will only take you so far. The real masters of the old Canadian winter didn't just store food cold. They changed the food itself so it could sit safely at room temperature for months, no cold required. And the more I learned about how they did it, the more foolish my big humming freezer looked. Think about a crock of sauerkraut. Cabbage is mostly water, and it bruises if you look at it wrong. Yet packed into a crock with nothing but salt, it transforms into something that keeps for the better part of a year and actually gets more nutritious as it ferments. That wasn't a hobby for our great-grandmothers. That was survival wisdom, brought over from the old country, refined over centuries, and it fed families straight through to spring when the fresh food was long gone. The same logic runs through everything they did: curing, salting, drying, rendering fat, and sealing meat under it. Each one is a way of telling a food, you will not rot, you will wait for us. And every one of these methods runs on salt, on smoke, on time, on the cold air God already provides in this country. Not one of them needs a wire running to a power station 3 provinces away. I want you to sit with how backwards our situation is now. We took the most reliable food security system a cold country ever invented, a system that survived 2 centuries in Newfoundland, and we traded it for a machine that dies the moment the lights flicker. We called that progress. My grandmother would have called it foolishness, and she'd have been right, and she'd have said it kindly while handing me a jar. Now, everything I've told you so far, the cold cellar, the sand-packed carrots, the fermenting crock, all of it is real, all of it works, and all of it is largely forgotten. But I promised you something at the start. I promised you one trick that made me stop and say out loud, that can't possibly work. So let me give it to you now, the way it was given to me, because this is the one that changed how I see my whole kitchen. It's about eggs. Now, think about eggs for a second. Of everything in your fridge, eggs feel like the most fragile, the most perishable, the thing that most obviously needs refrigeration. You leave a carton out on the counter, and you feel like you're doing something dangerous. That instinct is exactly what I'm about to take apart. Because there was a method, common across Canada and Britain before the fridge took over, that let ordinary families keep fresh eggs safe and edible for 6 months and longer, sitting in a pail in a cool corner, with no refrigeration whatsoever. And the method is almost insultingly simple. It's called water glass. Water glass is the old household name for a substance called sodium silicate. Back in the early 1900s, you could buy it at any drugstore or general store for a few cents, and thrifty households did, by the tin. It's a thick, clear liquid, and when you mix it with water, it turns into a solution that does something remarkable to an egg. Here's the how, and I want you to hear how little is involved. You take fresh, clean, unwashed eggs, straight from the hen with the natural bloom still on the shell. You mix your sodium silicate with cooled boiled water, usually around 1 part water glass to 9 or 10 parts water. You place the eggs gently into a clean crock or pail, pointed end down, and you pour the solution over them until they're covered by a couple of inches. Then you put a lid on it, set it in the coldest corner you've got, and you walk away. That's it. That's the whole thing. What the solution does is seal every one of the thousands of tiny pores in the eggshell. An eggshell isn't solid. It breathes. That's why eggs go bad. Air and bacteria creep in through the pores while moisture creeps out. The water glass forms a thin, airtight coating over the entire shell, locking the freshness in and the spoilage out. The egg inside simply stays fresh, sitting there in the dark, month after month, while the world worries about power bills. And I'm not asking you to take my word from some folk story. This was published, official, government-backed advice. Agricultural departments and home economics bulletins across Canada, Britain, and the United States printed the water glass method for households in the early 20th century, right through both world wars, when eggs were scarce and every family was told to preserve their own. During the Second World War, it came roaring back, printed in wartime thrift guides, because a nation at war couldn't waste a single egg. This was mainstream, trusted, ordinary knowledge. Your own great-grandmother very likely had a crock of water glass eggs in her pantry and never thought it was remarkable at all. And then the fridge came, and the grocery flights came, and eggs became something you bought by the dozen every week forever, and the crock in the corner became a story nobody told anymore. I tried it myself, because I had to know. I got fresh, unwashed eggs from a farmer down the road, mixed the solution exactly as the old bulletin described, and set the crock in my cold corner in the fall. Months later, in the dead of winter, I lifted one out, rinsed it, and cracked it into a pan. The white was firm. The yolk stood up tall and orange. It cooked and tasted like an egg laid that morning. I stood in my own kitchen feeling like I'd been let in on a secret that somebody had worked very hard to make me forget. A couple of honest notes, because I want you to do this right and safely. Use only fresh, clean, unwashed eggs, because washing removes the natural bloom and lets bacteria in before you even start. The eggs need to go in fresh and stay fully submerged and cool. When you take one out, some folks recommend the old test of setting it in water to be sure it's still good, and cracking it into a separate bowl first before adding it to your food. And the water glass eggs are best used for baking, scrambling, and cooking, since older preserved eggs can be harder to peel and the shells more delicate when boiled. These aren't complicated rules. They're the same common-sense habits our great-grandparents followed without thinking twice. That, right there, is the thing I wish somebody had handed me 40 years ago in that cold cellar outside Peterborough instead of letting me sneer at it. Because here's what all of this really adds up to. It was never about carrots in sand or eggs in a crock. It was about who holds the keys to your own kitchen. For most of my life, I handed those keys over without a thought. To the grocery chain, to the power company, to a fragile system that turns off the moment an ice storm hits, and I paid for that dependence every single month, and I called it normal. You are the kind of person who suspects, deep down, that a lot of real knowledge got quietly buried, not because it stopped working, but because it stopped making somebody money. You're right, it did. Everything I showed you today worked flawlessly for centuries in the coldest corners of this country, and it was pushed aside not because we found something better, but because we found something more profitable to sell you. The knowledge survived anyway, in outport cellars and prairie pantries and the memories of old country neighbors, and now it's yours again. So here's what I want you to do, and I'm asking you straight, because I know this crowd doesn't speak up unless somebody asks. I want to know about your cold corner. Do you have an old cold room under the stairs? Or a north-facing spot that stays cold all winter? Or a memory of a parent or grandparent who stored food away I didn't even mention today? Tell me in the comments. Type it out right now, even just a line. Somebody reading it is going to learn something that helps them get through this winter, and that's exactly how this knowledge stayed alive in the first place, one person telling the next. And if some part of you feels like you just got a piece of something back that should never have been taken from you, then you belong here, with the rest of us who are quietly relearning what our grandparents never should have had to hide. Subscribe and stand with us, because we're reclaiming this together, one forgotten method at a time. Next time, I'm going to show you the old way Canadians kept a single room of the house warm through the coldest nights for a fraction of what it costs to heat the whole place, a trick the old railway families swore by long before central heating. You are not going to believe how simple it is, and you're going to wish you'd known it years ago. Feel that cold coming? Good. This year, for the first time, you're ready for it. Before you go, one thing to those still with me. This video gave the overview, but inside the Northern Ways circle I walk you through the whole root cellar system for a Canadian winter, picking up right where we stopped. Ask me your own question, and a real person answers. Me, myself. You'd belong among practical folks like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click, no risk.